Let's discuss this with Accountability Now Director Paul Hoffman, Advocate Paul Hoffman, who joins us from Cape Town, I believe. Advocate, good to have your time. So we've got the ANC saying, look, it would be unfair to expect people to disclose the business interests of their spouses because the Constitution or the law that governs ANC members does not require them to do that. Should it?
Yes, I believe it does. Thanks for the opportunity, Thembekile. I believe that it does actually require that nepotism be treated as unethical behavior. The Constitution of the ANC does not talk about nepotism in terms, but it does talk about unethical behavior. And it proscribes unethical behavior. It regards unethical behavior as inappropriate in a good comrade. The difficulty that I have with the finding is that it is far too legalistic and does not actually address the ethical aspect of nepotism. Nepotism is jobs for pals, or as they say in Afrikaans, baantjies for boeties. And jobs for pals is not an appropriate or accountable way to run a country. So as far as the accountability aspect of what has gone on in these disciplinary proceedings, I'm afraid that the approach of the ANC has been far too narrow and legalistic and hasn't actually embraced the notion that nepotism in and of itself is an unethical behavior and is something in which the leadership of the ANC, the membership of the ANC, should not indulge.
And having
I'm not impressed with the
been in power so long, Advocate Hoffman, you'd imagine that the ANC would be aware of how corruption allegations, at least even in cases where there was confirmed corruption, that it's not always that politicians themselves are directly involved in corrupt agreements. There are proxies, often friends, often spouses or other relatives. So why not go ahead within all these years and put in place rules in the party that force members, especially the higher you go in the structure, to disclose as much as possible to avoid that?
Yes, it's clearly a conflict of interest situation if your household is massively enriched because your spouse or your child or your nephew is suddenly on the receiving end of a big, fat, well-padded tender. And to pretend that that is not the case, or to adopt this narrow legalistic approach that seems to have been adopted, is actually counterproductive, because already the voting population of South Africa sees the ANC as being soft on corruption, and the nepotism that you mentioned, this is the family jobs, as well as the cronyism, where friends rather than family get the government tenders or the largesse or the advantage of being related to people in positions of power, simply corrupts absolutely. And that is why the decision that has been reached limps and does not measure up to what is expected of those who would behave accountably and in terms of the constitution of the ANC properly interpreted.
But there's also the argument...
Sorry.
Pardon me, Advocate. There's also the argument that just by virtue of being an ANC leader's spouse, cousin, any other relative or friend, that does not make one automatically a corrupt business person. So where do we draw the line between the need for disclosures and perhaps unfairly painting people who are linked to politicians as corrupt?
The line has to be drawn at the point where the tender is under consideration. It needs to be highlighted at the outset. If it happens that the cousin or spouse is actually in a position to give the best tender and is the person who can best perform the services or supply the goods to the state, and that is all done above board and in an open and transparent way from the outset. There cannot be a complaint about that if fair and square the best tenderer happens to be the husband of the president's spokesperson. However, when it is done surreptitiously and underhandedly and in secret, and when you go and look at the tenders that have come in, there is an indication that other people tendered lower but didn't actually get the job, then the stench of corruption infects the entire process. So you ask where to draw the line. You draw the line at the outset of the process. You put up your hand and say, I just want everybody to know that my husband is tendering for PPE equipment, and if he happens to be successful, it will be because he is the best tenderer, not because he's my husband. But that didn't happen in this case.
So the ANC's National Disciplinary Committee in its statement overnight said that it's recommending that members of the Provincial Executive Committee in Gauteng go through some sort of course, if we can call it that, on morals, ethics and conflict of interest. Do you find that encouraging, or should people be so aware, already be so aware of all of that before they even ascend to PEC level?
I'm afraid it does smack of too little too late, but it's certainly preferable to continuing as we have continued in the past. It's really a question of understanding that a conflict of interest is not the way in which a government can be run in a manner that accords with the openness, accountability, and responsiveness to the needs of ordinary people that is required in Section 1 of the Constitution. It's as basic as that. You cannot be behaving accountably when you indulge in the unethical practice of nepotism, and that is what happens when ever so quietly tenders are awarded to family of people in positions of power and authority in politics.
Advocate Paul Hoffman, Director at Accountability Now. Good to speak to you, sir. Thank you.